You're just a pathetic janitor who couldn't even finish high school. Karen Williams screamed across the marble lobby of Preston Medical Center, her manicured finger jabbing toward the quiet man mopping floors near the elevator bank. People like you are exactly what's wrong with this country. Lazy, stupid, and taking jobs away from real Americans who actually deserve them. What this entitled suburban mother didn't know was that the stupid janitor. She was humiliating, possessed 3 PhD degrees from Harvard, spoke 7 languages fluently, and had published groundbreaking research that revolutionized modern medicine. But what she really didn't know was that Uncle Sam, was standing right there documenting every word of her racist tirade, building a case that would destroy her perfect little privileged world forever. You see, Dr. James Washington wasn't just any night janitor. He was one of America's most brilliant medical researchers while working on a cure for the rare genetic disease that was slowly killing his 8-year-old daughter. Karen's venomous attack wasn't just ignorant cruelty. It was a direct assault on a man who was literally sacrificing his prestigious career to save his child's life while contributing more to society in one night than Karen had in her entire pampered existence. Before I tell you how I exposed this Karen's as ignorance and racism while revealing the incredible truth about the brilliant man she tried to destroy, let me ask you something that might make your blood boil. Have you ever witnessed someone judge another person based purely on their job or appearance without knowing anything about their story or struggles? Drop your city in the comments and tell me about the most ignorant, judgmental behavior you've ever seen from someone who thought they were better than everyone else. Because what you're about to hear will make you furious and then leave you in tears. Please forgive me for needing to pause here and take a deep breath. At my age, after witnessing decades of human cruelty disguised as superiority, stories like this one still make my hands shake with anger and my heart break for the good people who suffer in silence while entitled bullies make their lives miserable. Thank you for bearing with an old man who still believes that kindness and respect should matter more than appearances and assumptions. To understand how Dr. James Washington ended up working as a night janitor, despite being one of the most accomplished medical researchers in the country, we need to go back 18 months to when his daughter Emma was diagnosed with Batten disease, a rare genetic condition that causes progressive loss of vision, motor skills, and cognitive function in children. The disease affects fewer than 200 children in the United States each year, making research funding extremely limited and treatment options virtually non-existent. James had spent 15 years building an illustrious career as a molecular biology researcher at Johns Hopkins University, where he led teams that developed breakthrough treatments for autoimmune diseases and cancer. His laboratory had published over 60 peer-reviewed papers in prestigious medical journals, and his research had generated hundreds of millions in pharmaceutical licensing revenue, while saving thousands of lives through innovative therapies. But when Emma received her devastating diagnosis, James made a decision that shocked his colleagues and abandoned his comfortable academic career. He would dedicate every waking moment to finding a cure for his daughter's disease, even if it meant giving up everything he had worked to achieve. The timeline was brutal. Children with Batten disease typically survive only into their teens, giving James perhaps 5 years to accomplish what entire research institutions had failed to achieve in decades. The challenge wasn't just scientific. It was also financial and logistical. Developing experimental treatments required access to specialized laboratory equipment, clinical trial facilities, and regulatory approval processes that could take years and cost millions of dollars. James's university salary and research grants weren't sufficient to fund the intensive, round-the-clock work that Emma's condition demanded. That is when James made the most counterintuitive career decision in medical research history. He took a night janitor position at Preston Medical Center, one of the country's leading pediatric research hospitals, where cutting-edge clinical trials were conducted using exactly the kind of advanced equipment and facilities he needed for his daughter's treatment. Working as a custodian provided James with several crucial advantages that his prestigious academic position couldn't offer. The job paid enough to cover his family's basic expenses. while allowing him to invest every dollar of his savings into Emma as experimental treatments. Most importantly, being invisible as a janitor meant he could observe ongoing clinical trials and collaborate informally with researchers who might not have had time for formal academic partnerships. The irony was profound. One of America's most brilliant medical minds was emptying trash cans and mopping floors, so he could access the resources necessary to save his dying daughter. While entitled people like Karen Williams assumed his janitorial uniform meant he was unintelligent and worthless to society. My first encounter with Dr. James Washington during my third week working as a part-time security guard at Preston Medical Center, a job I had taken to investigate reports of medical equipment theft and pharmaceutical fraud that had attracted federal attention. I was immediately struck by something unusual about the night janitor, who worked the pediatric research floors. His cleaning methods were far too systematic and purposeful for someone simply trying to maintain building cleanliness. James moved through the laboratories with the precision of someone who understood exactly what each piece of equipment did, and how sensitive research materials needed to be handled. He cleaned around experimental setups with the careful attention of a scientist, rather than the casual efficiency of a custodian. Most tellingly, he spent extra time in areas where clinical trial data was posted, reading research protocols and treatment outcomes with the focus of someone who genuinely understood the complex medical information. Over several weeks of observation, I began to realize that this wasn't just an unusually conscientious janitor. This was someone with advanced scientific training who was using his custodial access to conduct his own research activities. The question was whether he was stealing proprietary information for competitors or pursuing legitimate research that required unconventional access to facilities. The answer came when I discovered James working in Laboratory 7 at 3 a.m., not cleaning, but conducting sophisticated genetic analysis using equipment worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Instead of calling security, I watched as he performed complex procedures with the expertise of someone who had spent years mastering advanced molecular biology techniques. When I finally approached James to understand what he was doing, his explanation left me speechless. He showed me Emma's medical files, his own published research credentials, and the experimental treatment protocols he was developing using the hospital's equipment during his off hours. This wasn't theft or fraud, this was a father using his extraordinary scientific expertise to save his child's life while maintaining the legitimate job that gave him access to the resources he needed. The genius of James's approach became clear as he explained his research strategy. Batten disease research was severely underfunded because the patient population was too small to generate significant pharmaceutical profits. By working as a janitor, James could conduct his experimental work without requiring expensive grants or institutional approval processes that might take years to navigate. He was essentially running a one-man research laboratory using borrowed equipment during hours when it would otherwise sit idle. James had already made significant progress toward developing a gene therapy treatment that could slow or potentially reverse Emma's condition. His work built on research from multiple institutions, combining approaches that no single laboratory had resources to pursue simultaneously. The treatment he was developing could potentially help not just Emma, but the handful of other children worldwide who suffered from the same rare disease. What made James's situation even more remarkable was his complete humility about the sacrifices he was making. He never complained about the dramatic reduction in his professional status, or the physical exhaustion of working two demanding jobs while caring for a sick child. He simply focused on the work that needed to be done, treating his janitorial duties with the same professionalism he had brought to his academic research career. The confrontation that would change everything began on a Tuesday evening when Emma had an appointment for routine monitoring at Preston Medical Center. James had arranged his work schedule to accompany his daughter to her checkups, switching from his janitor uniform to civilian clothes so Emma wouldn't be embarrassed by her father's unconventional career choice. Karen Williams was at the hospital that same evening with her perfectly healthy 12-year-old son, Bradley, who was receiving cosmetic orthodontic treatment that wasn't medically necessary but would ensure. His smile met Karen's exacting standards for social acceptability. Karen epitomized entitled suburban motherhood, driving a luxury SUV she couldn't afford, wearing designer clothes purchased with credit cards, and treating every interaction as an opportunity to demonstrate her imagined superiority over people she considered beneath her social status. The confrontation began when James, still wearing his janitor uniform after finishing his shift, stopped by the pediatric ward to check on Emma before heading home. Karen immediately noticed his custodial clothing and decided that his presence in the children's treatment area was inappropriate and potentially dangerous. "Excuse me," Karen announced loudly enough for everyone in the waiting area to hear, "but I don't think janitors should be wandering around where sick children are receiving treatment. This is a medical facility, not a place for random maintenance workers to hang around." James politely explained that he was there as a parent, not an employee. But Karen had already decided that someone wearing a janitor uniform couldn't possibly have legitimate business in the pediatric unit. Her voice grew louder and more aggressive as she demanded that security remove what she called suspicious maintenance personnel from the children's area. "I'm here with my daughter," James said quietly, trying to avoid creating a scene that might upset Emma or other families dealing with serious medical situations. "She's a patient here, and I have every right to be in this area." Karen's response was swift and vicious. "Don't lie to me. People like you don't have children receiving treatment in a place like this. You're probably here to steal medical equipment or drugs, and I'm not going to let you put these innocent children at risk." The racist undertones of Karen's accusations were unmistakable to everyone present. She wasn't just questioning James's right to be in the pediatric unit. She was making assumptions about his character, intelligence, and trustworthiness based entirely on his race and his job uniform. The other families in the waiting area began to pay attention, some clearly uncomfortable with Karen's aggressive behavior, but uncertain whether they should intervene. James maintained his composure with remarkable dignity, repeatedly explaining that he was Emma's father and had every right to be there during her treatment. But Karen had worked herself into a self-righteous fury, convinced that she was protecting vulnerable children from someone she had decided was a threat based purely on his appearance. "You're just a pathetic janitor who couldn't even finish high school." Karen screamed, her voice echoing through the marble lobby. Other families stopped to stare. "People like you are exactly what's wrong with this country. Lazy, stupid, and taking jobs away from real Americans who actually deserve them." Let me pause here for a moment to control my anger. Even now, years later, remembering Karen D's venomous attack on such a good man still makes me want to march right up to her and give her a piece of my mind. At my age, having seen so much ignorance and cruelty disguised as righteousness, I sometimes wonder how people like Karen can look at themselves in the mirror and think they're really good people. The attack continued as Karen demanded that hospital security arrest James for what she called criminal trespassing and threatening behavior toward children. She insisted that someone with his background and appearance couldn't possibly be the father of a patient, and was obviously lying to cover up criminal intentions. "I'm calling the police right now," Karen announced, pulling out her phone with theatrical authority. "This suspicious man is claiming to be someone's father, but we all know that's impossible. Real parents don't dress like janitors when they bring their children to a place like this." That's when I decided I had witnessed enough of Karen's ignorant cruelty and stepped forward to intervene. As the security guard on duty, I had both the authority and the responsibility to address the situation. But I also had personal knowledge about James that would completely destroy Karen's racist assumptions. "Ma'am," I said to Karen with the firm politeness I had perfected over decades of dealing with entitled people, "I'm going to need you to lower your voice and stop harassing this gentleman, who has every right to be here with his daughter." Karen immediately turned her fury toward me, assuming that as an elderly security guard, I would be easy to intimidate and dismiss. "This man is obviously lying about being someone's father," she declared with absolute certainty. "Just look at him. Does he look like the kind of person who could afford treatment at a place like this?" Actually, I replied with a slight smile. Dr. Washington is not only Emma's father, but he's also one of the most respected medical researchers in the country. And since you seem so concerned about his qualifications, I think you should know that he holds 3 PhD degrees from Harvard University and has published groundbreaking research that has saved thousands of lives. The silence that followed was so complete you could have heard a pin drop. Corinne's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and slowly dawning horror as she realized the magnitude of her mistake. The other families in the waiting area were staring at her with mixtures of disgust and embarrassment, clearly appalled by her racist assumptions and aggressive behavior. "That's impossible," Corinne stammered, trying to salvage her position. "But he's really a doctor. Why is he working as a janitor?" "That doesn't make any sense." James could have simply walked away at that point, having been vindicated and having watched Corinne humiliate herself through her ignorance. But instead, he chose to respond with the kind of grace and dignity that made Corinne's behavior seem even more shameful by contrast. "I took the janitorial position," James explained quietly, "because it gives me access to research facilities during off hours, when I can work on developing experimental treatments for my daughter's rare genetic disease. Emma has Batten disease, which affects fewer than 200 children in the United States. There's very little research funding available, so I decided to use my scientific training to find a cure myself." The impact of James's explanation was immediate and devastating for Corinne. Here was a man who had sacrificed his prestigious career, his social status, and his comfort to save his child's life, while she had attacked him based on nothing more than racist assumptions about his appearance and job uniform. Karen's face crumpled as the full scope of her cruelty became clear. She had not only humiliated herself, but had viciously attacked a grieving father, whose only crime was loving his daughter enough to sacrifice everything for her. The other families in the waiting area were looking at her with undisguised disgust, and several people had clearly recorded her racist tirade on their phones. I didn't know," Corinne whispered, finally understanding that her privileged assumptions had led her to attack someone who was facing challenges she couldn't even imagine. "I'm sorry, I made a mistake." But James's response demonstrated why he was truly superior to Corinne in every meaningful way. Instead of accepting her pathetic apology or demanding further acknowledgement of her wrongdoing, he simply said, "I hope your son's treatment goes well," and walked away to check on Emma. The aftermath of Corinne's public humiliation was swift and comprehensive. Several witnesses had recorded her racist attack on James, and the videos quickly went viral on social media with captions identifying her as an entitled suburban mother who had viciously attacked a brilliant scientist based on pure ignorance and prejudice. The videos reached Corinne's employer within 24 hours, and she was immediately terminated from her marketing position at a local company that couldn't afford to be associated with such obvious racism and poor judgment. Her husband, mortified by his wife's behavior and the damage to their family's reputation, filed for divorce within a week. The luxury SUV was repossessed when Corinne could no longer make payments without her income. The designer clothes went to consignment shops. The perfect suburban lifestyle that had fed her sense of superiority crumbled as quickly as her false assumptions about James's worth and intelligence. But the most satisfying consequence was that Corinne's attack inadvertently brought national attention to James's research and Emma's condition. The viral videos led to news coverage about his innovative approach to rare disease research, which attracted funding from pharmaceutical companies and medical foundations that had previously been unaware of his work. Within 6 months, James had received over $2 million in research grants that allowed him to leave his janitorial position and establish a proper laboratory dedicated to developing treatments for rare genetic diseases. His work on Emma's condition accelerated dramatically with proper funding and institutional support. Emma's response to her father's experimental treatments exceeded everyone's most optimistic projections. The gene therapy protocols James had developed not only slowed the progression of her disease, but actually reversed some of the neurological damage that had already occurred. For the first time since her diagnosis, Emma's vision began to improve and her motor skills started recovering. The treatment protocols James developed were eventually adapted to help other children with similar genetic conditions, turning his desperate attempt to save his daughter into a breakthrough that benefited families around the world. His research was published in the New England Journal of Medicine and became the foundation for a new approach to treating rare pediatric diseases. James returned to academic medicine as a professor and researcher, but he never forgot the lessons he learned during his time as a janitor. He established a program that provides laboratory access and research support for parents of children with rare diseases, recognizing that desperation and love could drive innovation that traditional research institutions might never pursue. Corinne Williams, meanwhile, faded into obscurity, her name permanently associated with ignorant racism and the kind of entitled behavior that represents the worst aspects of American privilege. Her attack on James became a case study in business schools and diversity training programs as an example of how prejudice and assumptions could destroy careers and reputations. Years later, Emma Washington became a healthy teenager who pursued her own interests in science and medicine. Inspired by her father's dedication and the knowledge that love could literally move mountains, or in this case, cure supposedly incurable diseases. The case became one of my most satisfying investigations because it demonstrated how ignorance and cruelty could ultimately lead to positive outcomes when good people refused to be destroyed by prejudice and hatred. James's dignity in the face of Corinne's attack inspired others and brought attention to important research that might otherwise have remained underfunded and unknown. The broader impact of the case extended beyond individual justice to create awareness about the challenges facing families dealing with rare diseases and the innovative solutions that could emerge when brilliant people were motivated by love rather than profit. As I reflect on this story, I am struck by the contrast between Corinne's superficial judgments based on appearance and James's deep understanding of what really matters in life. Her attack revealed the emptiness of a worldview based on social status and material possessions, while his response demonstrated the power of genuine intelligence, compassion, and dedication. The investigation also reminded me that the most important qualities in people, intelligence, kindness, determination, love, are often invisible to those who judge others based on external appearances. Karen saw a janitor uniform and made assumptions about worth and character, while completely missing the extraordinary human being wearing that uniform. So, what do you think about people who judge others based on their jobs or appearance? Have you ever witnessed someone make cruel assumptions about another person without knowing their story or their struggles? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Tell me what city you're rewatching from and share any experiences you've had with people who thought they were superior to others based on superficial characteristics. But before you go, I need to tell you about Uncle Sam's next investigation, because it involves something that will make you even angrier about racism and entitlement in America. Picture this: a Karen who called police on a black family enjoying a community pool, claiming they were trespassing and threatening her children, not knowing that the father was the police chief. But every word of her racist lies was being recorded by witnesses. Make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell, because Uncle Sam's next story exposes eyewitness Karen called police on black family at pool. What happened next will shock you. The lesson from Dr. James Washington and Karen Williams' story remained clear. True worth comes from character, intelligence, and compassion, not from superficial markers of social status or economic privilege. Because sometimes the most extraordinary people are wearing the most ordinary uniforms, and the most ordinary people are wearing the most expensive clothes. And sometimes it takes a security guard with decades of experience watching human behavior to recognize the difference between genuine greatness and entitled mediocrity.